Good evening. I want to welcome you all to Northwest Unitarian Universalist Church. We don't know where one of our speakers is, but we're going to just have some fun anyway, get to know each other a little bit like we've been doing, and hear from some folks. So I start the evening out by introducing Chelsea, but right now she's busy, so we'll let her finish what she's doing. If you need restrooms, they're that way, that little sign down the hallway there. I want to thank our booksellers for coming tonight. I know I have done the bad thing and added to my 700 books, but I love books.
Yes.
It's an addiction.
It's an addiction.
There's a support group.
Is it really? We should start one, but then we'd be reading. Oh, they read this great book about addiction. That would be us. So I have minimal. I'm getting better about comics. I used to think that they were just things that were, bad and were not things to be read by real people who read real books. But thanks to Corey and lots of other folks, Corey is the librarian at Roper, and I work for her on Mondays. And thanks to her and Preston and several of the children's librarians in the various towns, I have broadened my perspective, and I think that comic books are a great way to spread wonderful ideas, particularly justice. So, are you ready?
No.
No.
Not at all.
I can just keep filling in.
I can listen to you all day, Katie.
Yeah, you do on Sundays. You listen to me all day.
She's a professional. Don't try this at home.
Yeah, ministers, we can talk and talk and talk. But I also want to say a special thank you to Kaya and Techen for bringing this idea to us. So this is Chelsea.
Actually, the idea came from Chelsea.
And she works for Access, which is the largest Arab American human services department organization in the country, which makes sense since we have a lot of Arab Americans here in this part of the world. She is the founder of Comique Con, which was and is a conference for women artists, women graphic artists, and she brought them all. And it was going to be this little thing, kind of just a few people.
We were hoping for about 400 attendees.
And what did you end up with?
More than 500, and I only know that because we ran out of wristbands.
So it was a huge success, and will be repeated. So she's here to talk to us about stuff.
I was supposed to introduce Nicole, but she's not here, so we'll make do.
So how did we get here in time to help us clean up?
Yeah. So I guess I can answer any questions that you guys have. I can tell you a little bit about Comique Con and kind of the thought process behind it and the rationale.
Yeah, tell us about the
Yeah, and I have a question. Isn't Comique Con the National Comic Con conference?
No.
Comique.
No.
I was gonna say, that is amazing.
So I guess I can start
That's
with the
happening.
name. So the name is spelled C-O-M-I-Q-U-E Con, like Comique Con. And my partner is always like, why Comique Con? I'm like, well, Q-U-E. I don't know. It's French. It makes things feminine. I don't know. Like Dominique, like whatever. So I came up with the idea. Is anybody here familiar with Gamergate? What happened during Gamergate? Okay. Does somebody want to talk about what happened during Gamergate?
I mean, I can tell you my understanding. I wasn't that familiar with it. My basic understanding, this woman, Zoe Quinn, made a game and a lot of people really, really didn't like it. Not having played it, but they didn't, it was a video game about depression, and they really didn't like that she made it because they didn't think that people should be making video games about depression, I guess. And they tried to dig up all this stuff to criticize her, and then argued that it was about gaming ethics and gaming journalism. And a lot of people didn't really buy that argument. And they tried to criticize her for lots of things like having had sex with multiple men, and things that really had nothing to do with the game. That's my
So like,
understanding.
yeah, exactly. Like in the comics community, comics and gaming are really intertwined, as you guys know. So what happened was there were women in comics journalism and like women in gamer journalism and just women in gaming that were getting a lot of online threats, like rape threats, death threats. You know, people saying online that they were going to come to their houses because, you know, whatever, it just exploded in this horrible festival of misogyny, basically. So that kind of, and I kind of been following the comic book world for a while, kind of noticing that when a woman would get promoted in the comic book industry, there'd be a lot of backlash saying like, why would you hire her? She's horrible, blah, 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 you know, and of course there's a lot of positive stuff too, but there's always this lingering sort of, people feel like they can say whatever they want online if they're not talking to your face, you know, so there's a lot of horribleness that comes out. So I've been following it and I was like, you know what, we need to do something about this. And what I wanted to do was to create an event to celebrate the contributions of women to comics, because what a lot of people don't know is that women have been creating comics since the medium was invented, since the 20s. You know, women have been creating comics for the longest time. And also something that a lot of people don't realize is that more than 50% of comics readership are women. So I think the last estimate was like 53% of comics readers are women. And they continuously get like bullied in comic shops. Like if a woman goes into certain comic shops, and I can tell you, because I have this friend and he's like an old school collector person. So he wanted to collect an entire series of Red Hood comics, which is published by DC, the same people that published Superman, Batman. So he was looking to collect a specific series, and he took me, I was like, okay, well, I'll go with you on this crazy road trip, because if you go on Amazon, the comic's gonna be 3 times as much as you could find in the store. But the problem is that one store might not have all the issues. So you kind of have to go on like a treasure hunt for these kind of older comics. So I went on that day probably to 15 comic book stores in Southeast Michigan. And I didn't buy anything at any of these stores. But I got various levels of treatment. So I experienced this myself in one day. One store, they didn't even acknowledge my existence. They went straight to him and they just didn't even consider me a customer whatsoever. So I was, you know, so women get certain treatments in certain comic book stores. I mean, I think that's starting to change as people realize that I have to court women if I want to make money, because women have 85% of the buying power in this country. So I wanted to do something to kind of celebrate and put a positive spin on all of this sort of negativity, sort of boys club that is the world of comics. So Comique Con, you know, we debuted it last year at the Arab American National Museum. I had really great partners in the museum and also at Green Brain Comics in Dearborn, which is a shop that's co-owned by a husband-wife team. And they were really great supporters of mine. Anytime I come to them with an idea, they're happy to support it. They're a really cool shop if you guys ever are on Michigan Ave in Dearborn, stop by. So yeah, we had our first year, we had more than 500 attendees. We were covered by MTV News. We were covered by the Detroit Free Press, Detroit News, all the comics, you know, industry outlets. And Nicole's here just in time, so I'm gonna keep talking. So we had 9 featured guests. We had a budget of $12,000. We had like 25, something around 25 guests that paid for tables, kind of thing. And it was just an overwhelming success. On a personal level, I've never had my work, because Access is the parent organization of the Arab American National Museum. So I had some of our board members from Access at the convention, and they were like, wow, Chelsea, this is so great. They never picked up a comic in their lives. You know? They're just like, wow, what is happening here? So just seeing, kind of a new audience for the museum was really cool for them. And I just like to think that we put a positive blip in the atmosphere. We're doing it again this year, October 22nd at the Arab American National Museum. We're gonna have some really great guests, including Mariko Tamaki, who has won a Caldecott. We are bringing in Janelle, a Caldecott award. We're the teachers here, Caldecott.
Go ahead.
Caldecott is the ALA award for picture books.
Which is the American Libraries.
The American Library Association awards. It's the oldest award.
It's like the
I don't know when it started.
Wow.
It is the librarian's version of Oscar.
Oh, that's
I mean, it's like
amazing.
everybody you look at their television because it means the book will be in print forever.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
The
So
publisher's gonna
it's,
be.
it's a really high honor. She's a very talented individual. Really excited to have her. Another person that we're bringing on this year is Janelle Salin. And she is especially interesting, well, I shouldn't say it right now. She used to be an editor for DC Comics, and she actually left because they promoted a senior editor who was accused of multiple counts of harassment. So he would, harass women at different events, and there was this huge outcry by Janelle and others who came out. Now Janelle is a journalist, and she publishes her own comics called Rosie Press Comics. But there's kind of this week actually, there's been a rehashing of all the sexual harassment stuff because this guy, and he was actually named last week, his name's Eddie Berganza. He works at DC still. Last week, DC let their only senior executive woman go.
Is DC Comics the comic that just made Batman and Superman?
Batman and
Maybe
Superman. Yeah,
they're
so
like
it's
Marvel comics.
So Marvel is like the Avengers, Captain
My
America.
boyfriend's obsessed with comics, but I actually like comics too. There we go. Girl likes comics.
Yeah, I mean, you, along with 53%,
Yeah.
whatever.
But they've been around
So-
for like 50 years, right? DC.
No, yeah,
DC and Marvel but go way back, And actually DC was founded by a woman. Like there was a woman executive back in the day. I can't think of her name right now, but it's Jeanette Kahn was her name actually. So there was an executive that was running the Vertigo line. Is anybody here familiar with Sandman, Neil Gaiman's Sandman, the Lucifer, so back in the day, in the 90s, they were the print. They were an imprint of DC, this Vertigo strain. Now they're kind of wavering in relevance a little bit, but they were trying to make a comeback recently, and Shelley Bond was at the head of it. They just let her go last week. They eliminated her position at the company. And there was a huge outcry in the world of comics because this Eddie guy, is still at the freaking company. And the only thing that he got was a slap on the wrist. He got demoted for a year or something, and then he got his old position back. And it's been 4 years, and this guy is still working at this company. And since then, since he was named last week, other people are coming out and kind of exposing other names of people that also work at DC who are also accused of harassment. And it's just this whole, they called it an open secret, until last week when this guy's name came out. But it's kind of, it just goes to show that these are very real issues. And you're gonna fire a very talented woman who's worked for you for 20 years, but you're gonna keep this guy who has at least 4 allegations of sexual harassment against him. And he gets to keep his job.
That's
really
crazy.
So, I'm sure Nicole
I'm just
has an
blood
opinion.
boiling
Yeah.
over here. I actually haven't heard that she left the company.
She got fired. They killed her position. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
How much more time do you need?
Well, actually, this is a good transition because I was about to say, this is why I don't deal with mainstream comics.
I'll introduce Nicole. So,
Sure, yeah, I'm ready.
So when I think almost immediately after we got the word out there about Comique Con last year, I got contacted by Nicole, who is the co-owner of Ad Astra Comix, which is a publishing company, and they're a retailing, online retailing operation out of Canada, formerly out of Toronto. Right now out of all over North America. She's been touring since November. So Nicole and her partner Hugh are really invested in telling stories of marginalized people. So telling stories that aren't getting out there through comic book form. One book that they published last year was called Drawing the Line, and it's sort of a reaction with Indian women to all of the famous gang rape that happened, I think in 2014. So, I think that book came out of a workshop where women told their stories in comic form. And Ad Astra is just publishing really cool stuff, and we're very happy to host her here. Thank you to Northwest for hosting us, and I'm really glad that you guys came out to learn more about comics and how comics are really one of the best media to impact social justice causes. So thank you.
Thank you for telling your story too.
Hi everyone, sorry so much that I'm late. I was in Chicago doing an event last night at Women and Children First Books, and I did not know that the NFL draft happens in Chicago, and that's a really big deal, and that kind of shuts down the entire downtown core. And I made the mistake of booking an appointment with a woman this morning who is a lawyer and is interested in using comics in her work with community engagement. I got a ride into downtown, but I did not have an escape plan. So I left a little bit late, and then my GPS decided to stop talking to me around, I don't know, somewhere on the 94 that I wasn't supposed to be. So thank you very much for your patience, and thank you to Chelsea so much for filling people in and talking with people about Comique Con and the state of women in comics. So hi. Hi. My name's Nicole Burton. I am the founder and currently a collective member of the Ad Astra Comix publishing collective. I'll pass around some cards if anybody wants some information that they can look up later. We got started many years ago. My relationship with comics, like many people, started when I was younger. I read a lot of comics when I was a kid. I got interested in political comics kind of by mistake. I was about 12, and I was going through one of the Scholastic brochures at my school. Do you guys remember the Scholastic? Yeah. And I saw that there was an ad for a book where I needed my parents to co-sign for me to order it. And I immediately got my mom to co-sign it, and 2 weeks later, Art Spiegelman's Mouse arrived in my classroom. And for anybody who's not familiar with Mouse, it's a two-part graphic biography. Art Spiegelman's father was a survivor of the Holocaust, and so the comic itself is a look at that history. Exactly. So if anybody wants to purchase it, it is available for purchase today. It's a sort of a biography, and then sort of like a meta biography where you're learning about the history of the Holocaust, but then you're also getting this really in-depth, multi-dimensional portrait of a man who survived it. And that has some good things to say about him, but it also has some not so nice things to say about him. Like, it kind of depicts him as a bit of a jerk. He's a little bit racist, and he's a little bit abusive to his wife. And it was the first comic to get out onto the mainstream publishing scene where people started talking about how comics might be able to be used to discuss more serious subject matter. And it went along to win a Pulitzer Prize. It was the first graphic novel to win a Pulitzer in, I think, '92. So yeah, from there I started reading some other comics. I was a huge fan of V for Vendetta by Alan Moore. Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi was pretty good. I feel like I'm listing off books that are probably in the room right now. But when I was in my 20s, I decided that I was ready to make comics. I had made comics as a teenager, and I wanted to make a political comic. I would really like to do a comic about history and social issues, something that maybe could be picked up for a classroom. But I had no idea what I was doing. I looked around for people who were maybe interested in doing the same things as me, so that I might be able to find a mentor or a community for what I called political comics. So I'm in Toronto. I go to about 10 different comic shops in Toronto, and I ask each of them the same question. What do you have that is political? And I get some interesting answers. You know, I get pointed in the direction of Mouse, I get pointed in the direction of some cool nonfiction stuff, but mostly I come to conclude that nobody really perceives political comics as its own category, and if you go to a comic shop, you might get pointed in a couple of different directions. You might see a few books that are typically on a back shelf that aren't necessarily by a mainstream publisher that's being promoted. So long story short, I set out to create or encourage or foster the community that I wanted to see with comics. I started a blog called Ad Astra Comix. For anybody who's curious, the name Ad Astra is Latin for to the stars. Part of my growing up was in Lawrence, Kansas, which Kansas prides itself on being a free state. Part of the history of the state is relating to a pretty serious struggle between abolitionists and pro-slavery people who are coming up from the South. And the slogan, Ad Astra per aspera, or to the stars with hope, comes from this sort of striving for excellence out of struggle. So I chose that name just sort of as a reminder of one of the places that I come from. And I started reviewing, researching, and interviewing any book and every comic that I could find that I felt was political. And I tried to look at books from taking an appreciation not only for the aesthetic of the book, but also the content of the book. So is the art nice? Is the layout nice? Did they do a great job? Yes, but are the politics there? Is it a good primer on a certain subject matter? Is it a comic that will maybe encourage people to get involved in something that's happening in their community? I tried to deal or address these two things with equal fervor and enthusiasm. And coming from a background of social activism, I've been an activist for over 10 years in student rights, anti-war work, feminism, Latin American solidarity work, you name it. I've probably been to a rally or a forum or been involved in some sort of campaign. I wanted to take that experience and maybe apply it to what I was seeing in comics. A few things became clear pretty early on. One was that I didn't see anybody else really leading the way in terms of political comics. I couldn't search political comics on Google and find a curated list of any particular subject matter. And I also found that comics often, I'm talking about the form and the content thing, like the art versus the message, the medium versus the message, I guess. That I felt was really, of the comics that I saw that were out there, it was really hard to find a good balance of those two things. Either the art was really good and the message was kind of ugh, or the message was really great, but they looked like maybe they didn't have a final editor, or they had never illustrated a comic before. And that's often the case, and that's okay. But it seemed like there could be some support in the community to help encourage these two things to come together and to be more in unity. So in 2013, I launched as a small distro. I started retailing comics that I thought were really good examples of political comics, books like Mouse, another one that I love showing people, books like this one. Anybody familiar with this? Addicted to War, Why the US Can't Kick Militarism. Anybody seen this? This is a great book. So it was put out by an educator, Joel Andreas. He was frustrated as a high school student because he felt like he did not have engaging materials to talk about the real history of the United States and its relationship to militarism. And so this is a great book. He actually researched it and illustrated it himself, and it's incredible. It goes from colonization and Manifest Destiny right up to, this is the latest edition that talks about the drone wars, it talks about Private First Class Manning, WikiLeaks.
It's more than one volume?
It's all in there, if you can believe it. There have been multiple editions that have come out. but it's very sort of condensed, and it's with the expectation that you will be able to supplement it with some other materials, like there's lots of sources that are talked about in it. And it's a great conversation starter for classrooms. I want to talk about a few other ones that we like to, I'm just going to take everything off here. Some other books that we reviewed, and we discovered kind of these political comics artists just by looking for work and showcasing them on the website. So just to be clear, the books that I'm passing around, I am not involved in these. I wasn't involved in publishing them. Part of what Ad Astra has come to do as a part of the political comics community is we create comics, we publish comics, but we also promote comics that we have nothing to do with. We just want to point people in the direction of comics that might be useful for them in their community work, in their school work, etc. So for instance, we started a hashtag 2 years ago called "There's a Comic for That." And so as you might go into Green Brain or like a comic shop and ask, what do you have by Neil Gaiman? What do you have by Brian K. Vaughan? What do you have by Kate Beaton? People come to us and they say, what do you have about colonization? What do you have about the BP oil spill? What do you have that's an environmental comic that's good for kids 12 and under? A part of our job is as curators, where we help to develop lists of comics that people can use to talk about these issues that are often complex, but that's not really the issue. They're often just kind of boring. They're kind of intimidating in that they are dry and wordy, and some of the most important information available out there is written in academic texts or otherwise inaccessible language. So on the subject of colonization, this is called Uneducation, a residential school graphic novel. I'm going to ask a question that we've been asking all over North America for the last 4 months. Approximately, what percentage of Canadians do you think are Indigenous?
30?
Feel free to just shout it out.
30?
70. What else?
5%.
10%?
10%.
No, 60.
60?
I
It's
said
pretty
5%.
varied, actually. I've heard as high as 75%. Can you believe it's 4%?
Oh,
It's 4%. Yeah. But we've been hearing 60, 70% all over the country. And I think one of the reasons for that is that Canada really likes to flaunt Indigenous artwork and Indigenous culture. When it's on the national stage in particular, it will proudly claim that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people are a part of Canadian heritage. And yet there's a really, really troubling history of colonization in Canada. And the residential school system is a really important part of that in order to understand what some of the legacies, what some of the impacts, the long-lasting impacts have been.
Are the residential schools in Canada kind of equivalent to like the boarding schools that Native Americans
exactly,
went to in
yes.
America?
It's the same in the United States.
Yeah.
So the last residential school in Canada was officially closed in the 90s.
Wow.
That was, the nature of the program had changed quite a bit since the 70s, so some people argue that really the program itself ended in the 70s and the schools themselves just stayed open. But to look at some of the impacts of the residential school system, which was really a forced assimilation. They had their hair cut off, they were hit and beaten if they spoke their native language. People were taken away from their parents. There was really severe cases of physical and sexual abuse and assault. To this day, people are dealing with that. This book by Jason Eaglespeaker, who is Blackfoot from Alberta, this is a book that was written by him. It's kind of half comic, half scrapbook, and it includes some testimony of survivors of the residential school system, including a fictionalized account of his grandmother who read the book and then called him in the middle of the night asking if people were reading his book. And he was like, yeah, Grandma, that's why I made the book. And she was in tears, and she was like, that is really great to hear. I'm so happy that people are going to know.
United States, we closed our last residential school, I think, for the last 10 years. We're way behind you. We do not have a Truth and Reconciliation agreement or anything going on with our local native, our local indigenous people at all. We're way behind you.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say that, I've worked at it's the only healthcare facility that is designated by the Indian Health Service Department, that's part of the federal government, to cater to Native Americans in the state and their healthcare needs who were relocated from reservations to cities. And people don't know that one of the biggest waves of this removal and resettlement was to Detroit. This happened back in the 60s, so there's a huge population of what they call urban Native Americans that are located around Detroit and the southeast area. These are people that lived in reservations again, and they were forcibly removed by the federal government. When working there, because we're so close to the border, we would find a lot of First Nations people, and First Nations people are what they call the indigenous population of Canada, who would be married to Native Americans here, and they would come, and it would be a father who's First Nations and a mother who's Native American, and they would say, can we both get health care? And we would have to say no. We would provide it to First Nations person for free, but we were only able to use the federal funds to cover, the American federal funds, to cover the health care, for example, the woman. So, but during this time, I saw so many heartbreaking, just wrenching stories of people who had been not just, forcibly removed to cities, but then after that they experienced, and throughout that, they experienced their mothers or grandmothers or grandfathers, their sons, being taken away from the family and sent to boarding schools. So I think that a medium like this is so great, especially to educate younger generations, because I never learned about any of that when I was in school, or grad school, or college.
There's a wonderful Native American museum in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, that has some of those pictures from the boarding schools, and it's a really moving experience it's just a little ways away in Mount Pleasant.
And I encourage you guys, if you haven't heard of this organization, it's called American Indian Health and Family Services. It's in Southwest Detroit, and it's a federally funded organization. So
actually, just building on that, another comic that we came into contact with was this comic. There is no title on this comic, but it's called Fluid Prejudice. I'll just pass that around. It actually comes from a Mark Twain quote, which says, "All of history is but fluid prejudice." It's actually an anthology of comics from Australia, from marginalized perspectives, and that itself includes a system of colonization and assimilation that is very similar to the Canadian and the American models for Australian Aborigines. But it also includes other stories that we may not consider to be political, and yet they are. There's a story in there of the last Tasmanian tiger. There's a story about the first man who contested his arrest for wearing a dress, for being a cross-dresser, and he took it all the way to court, and the judge eventually ruled that he was allowed to wear a dress because women wear pants. Why not? So it sort of looks at history from multiple lenses, and we really like it because we feel like it represents well the idea the personal is political. And that's something that really rings true with us. Our slogan is "the panel is political." So we really try and encourage people to think about the everyday as political, and also think about how comics can help us have conversations about those everyday political encounters. Something a little bit closer to home that people may be familiar with is March. It's a graphic biography or graphic autobiography of Congressman John Lewis, who was a street organizer during the Civil Rights Movement. This biography is absolutely beautifully illustrated. It really places you in some places that it's hard for us to even imagine what it was like to be in the southern United States in the 1950s and 60s. I feel like some of these panels really place you there. I also feel like March and some of the other books that Nate Powell has illustrated really give a lot of weight to unspoken interactions, like racial tension or microaggressions. What that looks like in a comic can feel so heavy just based on the way that the art is portrayed, that it really encourages the reader to kind of explore the meaning in between the words, so to speak, of those encounters where power can really disorient the balance of forces between two people or a group of people. I'm going to talk about drawing the line, because I feel like that's why we're here, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of context to the variety of things that we do. We're kind of a bit of a Swiss Army knife at the moment, because we're trying to trailblaze for political comics, and a lot of the world doesn't really think of political comics as its own genre, so we're building a genre while trying to get recommendations out there and write articles and publish and create, and it's just, oh, and drive across the country. I guess that's the other part of it. Before I talk about the tour, and I do have some tour stories, Drawing the Line is a very special book for us. It came up, it came under our radar the way that a lot of things have lately. It came up on Twitter. And wearing my promoter hat, I just get on Twitter sometimes and I just like, if I see a comic about a different issue, I will promote it, I'll retweet it, I'll go and check it out and like maybe take some screenshots and then like tag a couple of things that might draw people to the comic, like, you know, hashtag feminism, hashtag women in India, hashtag there's a comic for that, you know, different things like that. And the day after I did that, we got an email from Zuban Books, which is a feminist book publisher out of New Delhi, saying, thank you for your tweets. We were just on your website and we feel like you are our kindred spirits. We feel like you have a very similar take on the world as we do here at Zuban. And we just put out this comic just for the Indian audience. We were wondering if maybe you would like to do a North American edition of the book. And, you know, I looked at my partner Hugh, because we were a two-person team at this time, now that we're three. And we were like, yes, absolutely, this would be an amazing project. And so we got to work on that. We drew up a contract, we found a North American forward, or North American woman of South Asian descent who is also a cartoonist to do the forward. She goes by the name Sketchy Desi, and she does lovely illustrated recipes online for things like samosas and sweets and things like that. But she also does wonderful kind of e-cards or one-panel comics about growing up South Asian in North America and what that experience is like for her. And we produced a crowdfunder for it. So crowdfunding is something I like to spend a little bit of time talking about in our presentations, because it's really a game changer for people who say, don't want to deal with DC, don't want to deal with Marvel. Crowdfunding has made it possible for small publishers and independent illustrators, comics creators to put out their own work in a reliable, accountable, professional manner based on the money that they can generate ahead of time through a social media platform like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And the way that it functions for us is we just use that campaign as a pre-order campaign where somebody can donate $20 and they are signed up to get a copy of the book mailed to them as soon as it's back from the printer. And then there are other options too, like maybe you want to donate a little bit more for some original artwork, or maybe you're a bookstore and you want to buy 20 copies at a wholesale rate. You know, you can do that as well. But because crowdfunding is new and exciting and it's really, you know, it's shaking things up for a lot of different industries right now, it does lend itself well to promotional campaigns too. So we'll do a fundraiser to collect pre-orders, but that fundraiser will also serve as the main talking point for reaching out to media to talk about it. So we did a big push around media for Drawing the Line, but we did it a little bit differently than a lot of other publishers do. We went through this book and looked at the issues. You know, what is talked about in Drawing the Line? A lot of different things. It talks about sexism, it talks about, you know, discrimination in the workplace, shadeism, or you know, an inter-community discrimination based on the shade of one's skin. It talks about family expectations of young women, society expectations of young women. It really goes in a couple of different directions, and each comic is different. So we reached out to different people in North America who were already talking about those issues. You know, educators, journalists, photojournalists, bloggers, people who work in women's centers, people who work specifically with newcomers to Canada or the United States. And we just let them know about the book, and we just said, hey, you know what? Would this be something that would be useful to you in your work, in your community work, in your education work, in your advocacy work? And a lot of people got back to us to say, yes, I would love to be able to bring this to my class. I would love to be able to bring this to my art therapy group, to my peer support group for survivors of sexual assault, sexual violence. And it really just started to resonate with a bunch of different people. We ended up getting picked up by Huffington Post. We had coverage by BuzzFeed, and we even had a half a second on BBC World News, which is like, I've never been more excited about a half a second in my entire life. It went really well, it went smashingly. And you know, that really spoke to us because we are the first publisher to be doing this in North America. You know, I'm somewhat proud, but also somewhat embarrassed to say that we are North America's first publisher of comics that specialize in social justice themes. So that felt like a real vote of confidence to be able to crowdfund this project. So we released the book, and a couple months after that, we decided to hit the road. We've been traveling on a North American tour since November 30th, 2015. We originally drove through Dearborn on the way south, right? Is that, because I forgot all those posters at your house.
Yes.
Yes. We started driving through Detroit, but really the tour started in Savannah, Georgia. Everywhere that we went, we would hold workshops or, have events if possible, but mostly we kind of just wanted to talk with people. We wanted to see what issues were important to people in one area of the country, and what's the art scene like, and what's the comic scene like, and hey, have you checked out this artist from this other part of the country? And it's been this weird kind of like exchange of information and networks. So for instance, in Savannah, really beautiful town, lovely place. They have two primary parts of their economy, tourism and the military-industrial complex. The city is, I think, about 40% African American and 40% white, and there's about 35% of the population that lives below the poverty line, which is like, what's the poverty line right now? Like 16,000 a year or something? It's like not even, it's nothing. And yet, all the conversations happening at the municipal level in Savannah were not about the poverty crisis. It was not about the lack of opportunities for young people. It was, do we or do we not give the police automatic weapons to combat this crime? The framing of the debate was just like, everyone we met, we were like, what's happening here? And they're like, I know, right? We went to a vigil for Martin Luther King. This was right before Martin Luther King's birthday in February. And so this is how it was described to me by somebody who used to work as a tour guide in Savannah. Savannah is like a house. You can go down the streets and the big live oak trees are covered in Spanish moss, and they kind of create a rooftop over your head, and that's like a hallway. And then every couple of blocks there's a public park, and everybody hangs out in the park. They bring their kids, they bring their friends, their family, and so the parks are like the living rooms. And people will congregate there and socialize there and party there. And then the houses, that's like your bedroom, that's your private space. But the entire city has this identity, this character as a house and this sense of community. Even considering the massive crime wave that was happening there, I don't think I've ever seen a community of people talk to each other as much as I saw in Savannah. Total strangers, people who had never met before in their lives. And when we were gathering at the vigil, it was a candlelight vigil that was commemorating the life of Dr. King, but also calling for a revival of something called the Poor People's Campaign, which was a campaign that he started in '68 with SNCC, advocating for relief from poverty, but also looking at the roots of the root causes of poverty. So really getting into some radical territory. As soon as we got there, we heard pops from across the street where, you know, some gunshots had gone off. And just within 5 minutes, like 6 cruisers are out in front of this house. And, you know, we felt like pretty kind of shocked by it, but everybody else that was there, they're like, this is pretty much Savannah. This is like pretty much how we live. And it was a really inspiring thing, despite seeing that as the opener for this vigil, seeing people come together. You know, people who had never been to a political event in their lives, just kind of like being in the park and just kind of like, oh, what are y'all doing? You know, oh, okay, I'll join you, and like grab a candle. And it was a windy night too, so everybody's candles kept blowing out, and so it was this interesting ritual of camaraderie where over the course of an hour and a half, your candle would blow out and your neighbor would help you and like gently like light your candle back. And it was just like, it was this amazing kind of trust exercise with everybody who was there. It was like a beautiful way to become acquainted. We ended up producing a comic about that called A Light in the Darkness that's online. And that's kind of an example of some of the stuff we were able to do on the tour, meet with people, talk with people, sometimes interview people, and then produce a comic about it and put it for free online for people to see just sort of a glimpse of something that was happening in that area. I want to take a quick detour because that's what we did when we left Savannah. We went to Sarasota, Florida. What's in Sarasota, Florida, you ask, besides retirees and beautiful weather? There are sharks in Sarasota, Florida. And last year, Eugenie Clark, who was one of my childhood heroes, she was a shark expert, an ichthyologist, or a studier of fish, passed away. And very few people know who she is, but she was a half Japanese, half American woman who grew up at a very difficult time when it was not very easy to be half Japanese. It was like right post-World War II, and was a scientist. And was not very easy for a woman to be a scientist in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And yet, she went on to pioneer shark research for 5 decades, and not just in the United States. She founded about half a dozen different shark conservation programs in different countries around the world. She traveled with Jacques Cousteau on the Calypso's maiden voyage and is featured in a series of documentaries that he did while aboard the ship. And so I made this commemorative comic called Eugenie Shark. Oh, thanks. Just a warning, there aren't any staples in this copy. So just a heads up. I made this comic, and when we were in Georgia, I was like, oh my gosh, I think Eugenie founded a research facility in Florida. How cool would it be if we could go down there and show them this comic that I made about their founder? And so I did, and I think that must have been very bizarre for them, because I don't think they'd ever been contacted by a comic artist asking to come and give a presentation in the middle of their research facility. But they got back to me very spiritedly, and they said, you know what, we have an aquarium that's open to the public, that's adjacent to the marine research facility. How about you come and share your comics with people? So we drove down to Sarasota, Florida, and got to talk to people about Eugenie Clark, talk about the comic. It was an incredible experience, and I'm really looking forward to getting the book properly published so that it can actually get into more places where we need comics about women in science, women in STEM, and start some conversations there. After that, we went to New Orleans, where we were accidentally there for the first day of Carnival. That was kind of bizarre. Didn't realize that Carnival was happening. New Orleans is in the midst of a bit of an identity crisis. There's a lot of new people that have come to the city in the last 10 years. And there's this constant pecking order with people who have moved to New Orleans, where as soon as you meet someone, they're like, how long have you been here? And you're like, oh, I don't know, how long have you been here? And it becomes this thing where it's sort of this like battle of authenticity to see who is more authentically a New Orleans resident. Of course, the crown jewel of that pecking order is that you've been there since Katrina, or before Katrina, but like nobody that I spoke to had been there since Katrina, except for a few people who were like, this city is going downhill, and I need to find a way out. It was an interesting experience. We then went to Houston, Texas, where it's one of the fastest growing cities in this country. It's the 4th largest right now, I believe, and it has no zoning laws. So we were driving past elementary schools that were right next to ammonia processing plants. Plants that have a blast radius of 25 miles that we were told by local environmental activists. Environmental racism is a very big issue in Houston for predominantly the Latino population. A lot of people there, they will identify as Latino, but more than that, they will identify as Tejano. They are native Texans who have been there, their families have been there since before Texas was Texas. And a lot of people don't feel like they should have to leave a community where they have lived for multiple generations just because there are a lot of energy and processing powers in the city that, that try to pull their weight around. So we were given a toxic tour of Houston, and we were shown why environmentalism is such a big issue there. From there, we blew out a tire outside of El Paso. That was fun. If anybody has ever blown out a tire in West Texas, don't. It's a little scary. We drove across New Mexico, we drove across Arizona, we drove up the West Coast through California, Oregon, and Washington into British Columbia, did events in Vancouver, Victoria, drove across Canada because we figure we are based in Canada, so we should be connecting with people in Canada. That was also very important for our next publishing project, which is actually an anthology of comics journalism. Are you guys familiar with the term comics journalism? So it's like when somebody, either a one comics creator or a writer illustrator team will go somewhere and will draw what they see in sort of a documentary format. So a few examples of that that Chelsea's holding up, actually about the same geographical area. Joe Sacco's Palestine and Sarah Glidden's How to Understand Israel in 60 Days. World, super interesting. I'd recommend both of those books. Really, really interesting format. So our next book is called Extraction, and it looks at the Canadian mining industry from the perspective of 4 different resources: gold, aluminum, uranium, and oil. These are 4 resources that are very important to the Canadian economy. Canadian mining is a huge part of the Canadian economy, and despite our smugness about being, oh, we're so much better than Americans. Sorry, I can't stand that Canadian smugness. It drives me absolutely up, as a dual citizen, it drives me absolutely up the wall. Despite that smugness, Canadian mining companies are involved in grave, grave human rights violations all over the world, in dozens of countries, and it is important for us to be able to look at that for a few different reasons. One is we care about the environment, and some of these companies are horribly devastating to the landscapes that they operate in. We support Indigenous people and their right to self-determination, and these companies have consistently moved into their lands and taken things from their land without their consultation. And another part of it is kind of just, sort of like a not in our name kind of thing. Every single Canadian, through their pension plan, invests in these companies. It's sort of a thing about Canada that we get our pensions invested into Canadian companies, and because mining is such a huge part of the Canadian economy, everyone is investing in these companies that are not really accountable to anyone.
Yeah. And the people can't change it, right? I mean, if I had a pension investing in these mining companies, I wouldn't be able to change it.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. The best thing that you can do is, is basically lobby or advocate or protest about the fact that you don't want those dollars being put in that direction, and slowly, surely, with enough critical mass, maybe some things can happen in terms of broader long-term change. But that part aside, a big part of it for us is just raising awareness. Mining and environmental issues in general can feel quite intimidating to people. There's a lot of multi-syllable words, there's a lot of areas that you've never thought about Kashipur, India before, or San Marcos, Guatemala. These are places where Canadian companies have mines. It's more to offer Canadians a chance to familiarize themselves with these activities in an engaging and entertaining way.
So Nicole, we actually have a second speaker tonight.
Sure.
Ayesha's going to speak, and so if you want to sort of...
Yeah, this is the last point, is what we're doing next. So, so Extraction is the next book that we have coming out. It's launching in 3 days. And I really, really thank all of you for coming and listening and sharing in these comics with me. Thank you.
So hi everyone, my name is Ayesha Ghazi. I just want to thank you for that amazing talk.
Oh, thank you. I apologize. I thought that I had missed your talk.
It's absolutely
from
fine.
before.
And if anything, I think that, hearing some of the things that Nicole was talking about really helped me to decide that one of the things that I really want to focus on, that I talk about, or during my talk, is learning throughout my activism. And I, by the way, am a social justice activist. I'm the executive director of an organization called American Citizens for Justice. And that was an organization that was founded after the hate crime murder of Vincent Chen. And he was a Chinese American back in the 1980s who ended up going to a bar in Highland Park. And during that time, there was a lot of anti-immigrant sentimentism building up. Well, in general, there was a lot of anti-immigrant sentimentism. And especially targeted towards Japanese Americans. The economy was tanking, and people were saying things like, Japanese keep taking our jobs. So here's this guy, Vincent, at a bar, hanging out in Highland Park. He's Chinese, remember, and a supervisor from the Chrysler plant and his son approached him and said, because of you, we're losing our jobs. And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm here for a bachelor party, and leave me alone. And they waited outside in the parking lot for him, and they beat him to death with a baseball bat. And they only ended up paying a $3,000 fine, and they spent no time in jail. They had probation for about a year. So this organization was created with money from the trust that they gave to Vincent Chen's family. But what it did was it really propelled the Asian American kind of advocacy movement across the United States. Unfortunately, not really in Detroit until much later, until recently. So we work with a lot of other Asian American organizations, and they may be focusing more on voting rights or on social kind of services, while we were the only organization that was really focused on fighting discrimination. So anyone who was experiencing a civil rights issue, they would contact us. And obviously that requires, and it's a necessity, that we are partners to other movements like Black Lives Matter, like the LGBT movement. And it's been a really crazy kind of ride, just being on the inside, seeing the family members, seeing kind of the rise and fall of the organization. And I guess one thing that I kind of was thinking about during the course of you telling, just all the powerful stories and experiences that you have, is the power of telling your story through art. And one of the things that we battle with the most as head of American Citizens for Justice is a lot of people in Michigan don't even know the killing happened. They don't know the Vincent Chen killing happened, but they also don't know how, intrinsically tied it is to other civil rights movements, like Michael Brown, like all the other, African-American kids who have been killed by cops, by the numerous transgender women that have been victims of violence and crime, a huge proportion of them which live in Detroit. I mean, there's a huge rate of violence and crime against transgender, especially African-American females there. And one of the things that has been an inspiration to me is one of our board members. He's younger than me. His name is James Wilson, and he is a Filipino adoptee. So he was adopted by a white family in the United States from the Philippines when he was younger, from an adoption agency. And one of the issues that he's really passionate about is transnational adoption. And we've worked with some kids, my organization, and one of the things that we started doing with them was art classes. And a lot of the kids that we were talking to were South Asians, or they were East Asian, they were from the Philippines, they were from China, but a lot of them had amazing stories like James, but they just didn't know how to articulate it. And in the course of having these sort of classes, these kids would create the most beautiful narratives of their experiences, either in a picture format, I mean, I wish in a comic book format, but it actually encouraged my board member, James, to come to me and say, this is something we need to invest in. We need to invest in art as a form, as a medium of education, of activism. We haven't really invested in anything yet, but I mean, this is something that I would love for our organization to continue supporting, and your guys' work, we would love to get it out there. And then in the course of this, he created his own documentary on his experience as a transnational adoptee. He actually saved money, he went on crowdfunder, and raised money to go back to the Philippines and find his mother. His mother had just recently deceased, but find his family. And he ended up, this is something I can share with you guys because it's public in his work, he's in the process of making this documentary. He ended up finding out that his father is his mother's sister. And that is why there was so much kind of secrecy and shame around it. There was another incident recently though, where I realized again, his mother, or I'm sorry, father was the mother's brother. Did I say sister?
Okay, so you're transgender and I'm thinking,
siblings. It was an incident of rape. His name, by the way, and you guys can also look this up, but it's James, and I'd actually love to put him in touch with you. His name is James Benny Wilson, and Wilson is his given, family name from his white American family that lives here. James is also the name that they give him. But Benny is his middle name from the Philippines, which they give all adoptees a middle name there in the orphanage. And his story that he was told was that he was found in a plastic bag hanging from a banana tree. So Benny means hung. And he carried that story and he thought that was a reality. And recently he found out that, he was surrendered because his mom had been raped by her brother. And it was so, there's so much stigma, and there's even, despite the fact that women are the violence of these crimes, so much stigma against them, but she abandoned him. Anyway, so I'm just going to share a little bit, about my activism, and that's what I do in the Asian American community, primarily civil rights and being supporters of other minority and marginalized movements, and also voting is another issue that we are very engaged in because we think that is really the only, when it comes to politics or politics or personal, something that you had said, really reminding people that you do have access to change the way that the face of your representatives look. And part of the reason people don't think that is it is strategic kind of disempowerment that's happened over many years. So that is who I am, and I'm just going to keep it short and sweet. And I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here as well.
It's been amazing, and I would love to get in touch with you more. I've also done some work with South Asian women who are in the prison system who use art as a medium.
Oh wow!
There's a lot of women that are at times wrongfully punished when they commit crimes in self-defense of their domestic violence abusers. Mm-hmm. So this will be women who have been beaten or raped or abused for years and years, and then in self-defense they will defend themselves and their partner dies, or their partner, who's a male, will force them to be an accomplice in a crime. Mm-hmm. And I met a woman named Kinnary who wouldn't share her story in English with us when we met with her. And I spoke to her fluently, in Hindi, and she told me that she had been beaten and raped as a wife by her husband, who's a doctor here, for about 10 years, until she finally grabbed a letter opener and she stabbed him. And the way that immigration law works here is if you are not yet a naturalized citizen, then you have to be deported after you serve your time in prison. So I met her, and she was very kind of meek, and she was quiet, and she didn't know English fluently. And I met her through a project, by the way. If I'm going on or I'm getting kind of all over the place, someone can stop me and say, can you verify? But a project that was created by an art professor at the University of Michigan. And she started going into the prison systems, making documentaries of women, and she realized so many incarcerated women were victims of sexual abuse, committing crimes, quote unquote, to defend themselves from domestic violence or sexual abuse and trafficking. And she did a study on it. It's called the Michigan Women's Justice and Clemency Project. And women who commit these crimes in self-defense have longer and harsher sentences. African American women have the longest, more than any other perpetrator of violent crime in our systems. That means more than a white man who's just gonna shoot someone in the street for whatever, because there's a lot more than just someone who's gonna rob a bank. Because there's so much demonization of women, it's so gendered within our justice system, making them look like they were the serpent, they were deceiving, and these are women who've actually been abused over and over again, and then abused, unfortunately, by the system. So this woman, Kinnery, who was really hesitant to share her story with us, why we were there was we were going to write a clemency letter on her behalf to the Michigan Department of Parole. We were going to say she needs to be let out. She's been a victim. She's continuing to be victimized. She wasn't as communicative as we'd hoped, and there wasn't much we could do. And she had started to receive threats from her in-laws' family in India. They had, their son had been murdered, and suddenly they found her father had opened up the door to his business and found her uncle beaten in front of the door with a note that said, "This is going to happen to your daughter when she gets back." And in India, and this is my mom, and she obviously knows a lot of what I do as well, so she can probably testify to this. If you're rich, unfortunately, I think that you can kind of establish the rule of law. You're above the law. And yeah, it is true here too, kind of the oligarchy
But it's
that
worse in
exists.
India.
It's worse. It's worse. And what was horrible about this is the woman Kinnery started telling me this was the case. And she said, all I really want to do, because I know I'm going to be deported soon, is I want to find some shelters there. I want a sexual violence group, something that's going to protect me and support me. She, of course, because they have laws in Michigan where, they can't access the, it's called a contraband law in the prison system. They can't access the internet. They can't even have pamphlets in the prison system. I did a whole web search, and I listed every single shelter that I could find. And upon her release, it was sent to her, and I haven't actually heard from her since. But then I started working at another prison justice outreach group, another organization. This was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And they were having an art sale to benefit prisoners. And these were art pieces that were collected from prisoners from all over the nation. And I looked and I saw this painting, and it had a lot of Hinduism, symbolism. It was a picture of the world and a woman standing on top of it being tugged in both an east and west direction. And I had all of this Hinduism symbolism on the eastern side, and also devils. And then on the west, it had, more kind of positive symbolism, but Christian symbolism. And there was something about it that just spoke to me. And I turned it over, and it was by Kinnery. And she had drawn it, she had painted it, and I remember that moment, remembering again kind of the power of telling your story through illustration.
But what about the red saris and the pink saris?
What are the red saris and the pink saris?
In India, the groups, the women's groups.
Oh, the women's activism groups.
sticks.
Have you heard about them? The red saris and the pink saris. They're activists who.
Gulabi Gang, I think, is one of them. They just go around near their area and beat up men who are
So they're like a vigilante group.
Yeah, they're a vigilante group.
So that says a lot too.
But
right?
when they catch
Yeah.
them doing wrong, and
Yeah,
they have
beat
big
'em up.
sticks and they beat them up, women that are being abused and.
I'd be really interested to read more about this group, but also think that it would be something that would be good for people, immigrant women who've either experienced sexual violence, domestic violence here. There's a lot of organizations my organization works with that they specifically work with South Asian women who've experienced abuse, and also people coming out of even the prison system.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting what you brought up. I'm familiar with an immigration youth art director in Australia, Safdar Ahmed, who you're not allowed to take pictures inside detention facilities.
Yeah.
And yet there are entire detention facilities in Australia that are filled with young people who basically are just sort of stuck there indefinitely. And so he did a comics creation workshop with them, and then of what their life was like in the center, and then smuggled out their comics.
Wow.
It's called Villawood, and it's available
Should
online.
look at that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
When I had spent some time, I actually studied abroad in Australia. And another thing that came up in some of the international human rights courses that I was taking at the time was there was such a problem with quote-unquote drug use among the Aboriginal males. They had invented a new type of petroleum, a new type of gasoline that you could not get high off of in the Victoria State. And they had changed the light bulbs of public bathrooms blue because they were saying all the Aboriginals, when they go into public restrooms, they use IV, heroin usage and whatnot. So with the blue lights, they can't see their veins. There was such a kind of like a politicized, like policing of the consequences, I think, that resulted from colonization to these people. But again, that was something that we learned about in my course through someone drawing a picture about it. And it was this kind of comic, it was a graphic novel that we were showing, and then we had someone come in and talk about it. So that's something else that we can touch base on. But anyway, so I guess the whole point of me talking and rambling like this is...
It's okay, it makes me feel better about it.
You were definitely, you steered your course a lot more than I did. I have realized the power of really telling your story. And I think the power of illustrating your story. And I wish I really had that talent. I think that it's such an amazing tool, especially to cross kind of cultural bridges to other people. May not be from your community, but they can relate to the pain that you're going through. And I have become an activist in some of these causes because I was reached out by people telling their stories in color form. So I want to thank you for sharing everything that you did.
Your book available for people to purchase?
We do, yes, and this is my final stop on the North American tour. So I'm really, thank you very much. I'm really very much in favor of, if anybody wants to get a copy of the book, now is absolutely the time to do it, because you don't have to pay shipping, you don't have to deal with any of the stuff that comes with.
Tommy wants to give some community here in your store.
Oh, wonderful, that's so great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Tommy is here from Book Beat, which is a wonderful independent bookstore here in the park.
That's fantastic.
Place to visit. She always has the best books.
And your social media information's on here? So
It's all on there. We share a lot of comics for free online.
Okay,
so
cool.
if people use social media or get
And I want to
online.
promote you guys among just kind of these Asian American organizations that I work with.
Let's talk about this.
Yeah, that would be great.
I did want to say a short word about Ayesha, because Ayesha was kind of recruited for being here tonight because she is an amazing activist, and she's also a woman with Indian roots, Indian American roots, and I'm so glad that her mother could be with us tonight. And it's Ayesha was recruited by Rashida Tlaib, who is a state legislator that we all know, and Rashida will be speaking on how the Muslim faith supports reproductive justice, standing up for women. And so many people sometimes think of the Muslim faith as being anti-women. And so I'm going to put in a plug for that. Rashida will be speaking on the Muslim faith at an interfaith reproductive justice conference. It's coming up on May 20th. It's very affordable. We'll be having it's $20 a person, or if you can't afford the $20, we'll work it out. But basically, it's going to be having people from all over the country that will be coming and telling about how can you be a stronger leader, how can you have conversations using your faith to convince and to communicate with people who might be anti-women, anti-family. So I'm pretty excited about it, and I'm hoping you all will consider going to it.
And I'm on the steering committee with Randy. Randy, thank you so much for the kind introduction. He is a huge inspiration to me as an advocate as well. And this conference, I think, is the first time where they are trying to recruit people into being activists for reproductive rights, because that is being hammered by our legislation over and over again, using people's faith, which I think is a really good and really powerful tool, because a lot of people use that as, and they see that as their compass for morality. But instead of trying to do it in a divisive sort of way, where Christians have their own seminar and Jewish people and Muslims, we're having it all together at once. And from just even organizing it, we've already seen there are so many commonalities between the faiths in what they preach and what they understand, and on what drives them to fight for equality for women and reproductive justice. So we're going to have people from the Center for Progressive Leadership, from the Center for
Catholics for Choice.
Catholics for Choice, the Jewish American services. Aren't they sponsoring it? Or
We've got we're getting new groups all the time that are sponsoring it, but we're also having the Michigan Women's Progressive Caucus, 16 women from around the state that are progressive, that are co-sponsoring this. Legislators, yeah.
We
Female.
essentially focus on women's issues.
So in Michigan, it's a real uphill fight because the legislators are predominantly Tea Party, and they think they have the right to tell women how to live their lives just because they're legislators.
Yeah. So anyway, we encourage you guys to come because it's, you know, it's everyone's voice that helps to speak up and say, actually, my faith believes this or that or whatnot. So.
Looks great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
I wanted to thank too that Craig Miles, who's been a spontaneous blessing for us because he's taking pictures or videos for tonight, and I'm kind of hoping that his blog or his video could help us reach out to the Indian American community who we were hoping would be here in massive numbers, and as it is, we're thanking Mom now for being here. But thank you for taking the pictures.
I want to make a request to people, stick around as long as you like, but I bought all these refreshments and I was going to put out a basket for donations and I forgot. So I'm going to put one out now and... You put what?
The basket over there.
You put the basket over there?
I'll move the basket.
Yeah, put it by the...
It'd be a good idea, yeah.
Yeah, and...
Location.
Yeah, and
All right. Well, it was an intimate circle.
yeah.